Hello and welcome to a new edition of our program, Peace Be Upon You. And in this edition of our program, we will continue our discussion about the relationship between international humanitarian law and Islamic teachings and Islamic jurisprudence. And today we are delighted to be joined by our dear guest, Dr. Hossam Ed-Deen Allam, lecturer of international humanitarian law. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me.
Where did the international humanitarian law originate?
Yeah, this is definitely a very important question, and we have highlighted, and we can delve more into the origins or the roots, if you like, of international humanitarian law. War is a phenomenon that can be traced to the dawn of history. There has always been this state of conflict that can lead into carrying arms or two parties resorting to violence in order to reach a settlement or to find out a resolution from their perceived positions to the conflict that is going on with regards to their interests. So this is why deep in the conscious of every society and every civilization, there has been this perceived and constant need in order to come to a realization, or if you like, a customary understanding and still a standing understanding and realization and recognition that there are rules and principles that need to be observed and respected whenever there is a state of war. Because clearly when such realization is not there, is absent, is lacking, the humanitarian suffering and the human cost is so much inconsiderable. So this is why always the wise in all societies and across the generations, there has always been this need to make it very obvious and very deeply embedded in the back of the mind of every society, of every social phenomenon, of every civilization, that even during times of war and out of concern for the humanitarian considerations, there needs to be this careful balance between the taking into consideration the humanitarian concerns that need to be kept and maintained, as well as the military necessity of states or these sovereign entities across the centuries. And this is why, especially following World War I and World War II, in our time and the era, there has emerged the need for coming into a customary understanding, and even I would say the need for a universal declaration of such body of rules that are meant to be applicable and observed during the times of war. And this is why we have, as I mentioned earlier, the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1994 and the subsequent or the additional protocols of 1977, and how is it each convention is very specific when it comes, for instance, the first one of the fighters who are no longer fighting on land, and then we have the second dealing particularly with shipwrecked prisoners, and then the third dealing with prisoners of war, and then the fourth dealing with essentially the protection of civilians. And we will look more into these various Geneva Conventions and the subsequent protocols, and also we will also be looking into each one of these rules and principles from an Islamic perspective, and how is it, as a matter of fact, the Islamic jurisprudence is a forerunner in this regard, and is, as a matter of fact, a torchbearer when it comes to minimizing the human suffering and ensuring, and this is why I do think that this is also related to peace building, because no conflict lasts forever or for eternity. So the very fact that there are these set of rules and regulations that will be observed by both parties in order to minimize the suffering of human beings on both sides ensures that there is this necessary commonality of understanding, this necessary commonality and background of maintaining this part of human dignity of all parties. And this is why when the conflict de-escalates and the war or the fighting comes to an end, the fact that the rules of international humanitarian law, I mean, these rules, all of them were observed, this constitute a stepping stone for any meaningful peace-building process in the wake of the conflict or in the wake of the war.
So if we go back in history, can you shed light on how Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to treat hostages, women, children, and the behavior of Muslims in times of war?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and that's very relevant to the theme of this series of episodes. And it's very worthwhile in this regard to highlight a common set of teachings that, as a matter of fact, were uttered by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he addressed, or when he used to address the Muslim army. And this was actually the practice of the following caliphs or leaders of the Muslim community, be it, for instance, as reported to be also the case with the practice of the noble companion of Bakr as-Siddiq, as well as Umar ibn al-Khattab. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, would clearly address the army and clearly state to them that you may not transgress, that you may not target civilians who are not combatants in our times terms, I mean civilians, and that they are not allowed to target women or children or the elderly, or to target places of worship, be they churches or synagogues or any places of worship or temples, as well as the prohibition of mutilation or disfiguring the dead bodies of the fighting, the other fighting party or the enemy. In addition to this, we have clear prohibition when it comes to even targeting animals. So the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings upon him, would clearly instruct the individuals of the Muslim army not to even unjustly kill a living being for no just reason, except, for example, when there is a need to slaughter in a merciful way in order to for this to serve as food. So here also we can see clearly this dimension of observing the environment, and this is why we have clear instructions from the Prophet, peace be upon him, alongside the noble companions of the Prophet, not to, for example, destroy trees or palm trees, or to poison sources of water or wells. So all of these are instructions and teachings and clear directives in the Islamic jurisprudence and the noble Islamic Sharia that clearly prohibit any form of transgression. And we can clearly see, and we draw a clear nexus and connection of conformity, as a matter of fact, between our current day understanding of the rules of international humanitarian law, as well as the understanding and the practice of the rules of Islamic jurisprudence. So these are just some of these examples of the teachings of Islam, be they are embedded in the noble Quran itself or the authentic teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the practice of his noble companions.
Even his companions and those who came after him when they entered the new places or new cities, like Amr ibn al-As when he came to Egypt. Yes, he had a very peaceful behavior with the people who were living there at that time. So can you elaborate on
this? That's a very important and outstanding example of the understanding of the early Muslims, and I mean particularly the noble companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, of these clear instructions of the noble Islamic Sharia, of observing the dignity and the humanity and the honor of all human beings. And the books of history tell us, as a matter of fact, how is it the Roman Empire back then was actually occupying the land of Egypt, and they were, as a matter of fact, persecuting the Christians of Egypt to the point that the head of the Christian community in Egypt, as a matter of fact, he had to flee into the desert out of seeking a resort or a safe haven from the persecution that the Egyptians were going through and facing under the Roman occupation. And how is it when the companions came along with the noble companion Amr ibn al-As to Egypt, how is it the safety of the places of worship, the civilians, particularly women and children and the early, it was ensured, safeguarded, and guaranteed. And how is it there was no form of any form of armed confrontation except with or against the soldiers of the occupying Roman Empire back then.
Dear viewers, a short break and we'll be back, so stay tuned.
ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. And we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea, and provided for them of the good things, and preferred them over much of what we have created, with preference.
Welcome back, dear viewers, and we are still watching our program Peace Be Upon You, and we are still hosting our dear guest, Dr. Hossam Ed-Deen Allam, and we are talking about relation between international humanitarian law and Islamic jurisprudence. So, sir, can you go on in your explanation?
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. Always a pleasure being with you here. And yeah, this is definitely a very important theme to cover, especially in light of many development that our international global human family is witnessing because of these conflicts taking place. So this is why it's very important. I do think that it's very important to highlight this nexus or this relationship, if you like, between the rules of international humanitarian law or IHL, as well as the rules and the principles and the maxims of Islamic jurisprudence.
Also, sir, there is no doubt that the Constitution of Medina that our Prophet, peace be upon him, concluded after settling in Medina is considered the most important document for coexistence in human history. It's stated the rights and duties based on national and humanitarian basis. So how did the Prophet, peace be upon him, set these rules and principles of peaceful coexistence among the people of Medina at that time?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and actually it broadens the scope of our analysis of Islamic jurisprudence and its nexus with international humanitarian law, because it's important and it's vital and fruitful in this regard to understand the bigger picture when it comes to the philosophy of Islam, or the perspective or the standpoint of Islam when it comes to respecting each and every human being, and how is it Islam has always and is always, as a matter of fact, eager to minimize any form of armed confrontation between or among the people. So this is why, and it is worthwhile here to mention in this regard, how is it we have a very outstanding model of peaceful coexistence. I mean, that's very obvious in the era of the Prophet's life in Medina, following the immigration of the Prophet, peace be upon him, along with many of the companions from Mecca to Medina. How is it? It was a diverse society, and it was a pluralistic community. Yet the Prophet, peace be upon him, he wisely and effectively managed to create and establish a cohesive social fabric out of the society by drawing or by creating this wathiqa of Medina, or this charter, or this document, or if you like, this constitution of Medina. Because as a matter of fact, yes, it is safe to state that it is actually one that stands as a constitution in light of our understanding of what a constitution is nowadays. So as you exactly and correctly highlighted, how is it embodied rules that made it clear that all the people of Medina are equal, and they enjoy the same rights, and they shoulder the same responsibilities, and all of them constitute one nation or one community against any aggression. I.e., this was, as a matter of fact, also an endeavor from the Prophet, peace be upon him, to have a wider application of the rules of Islam when it comes to any military engagement. Because when Islam says it is prohibited to transgress against non-combatants or civilians, then this will be binding on all those who fight in Medina. So this is, as a matter of fact, to be seen as a means, and because this is, as a matter of fact, is cemented and supplemented by how the Prophet, peace be upon him, started communicating with the surrounding sovereigns and heads of states. And we have seen how the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent ambassadors and emissaries and peaceful messengers to Egypt, to the land of Persia back then, to the Romans, in an effort to bring about a collective understanding, and even an international, not only regional, but an international understanding that there are rules that need to be observed, that there are principles and maxims that need to be respected. Because when we look into this part of the world and beyond, it was very common that whoever is more powerful, whoever is more mighty, they can just invade the less powerful and subjugate them, occupy them, invade them, enslave them. But Islam came in order to bring about an end to such human atrocities and human suffering, and to establish rules of coexistence that, as I said earlier, maintain, protect, safeguard, and ensure the safety and the honor of each and every human being, not only during peace times, but also during times of armed conflict.
ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. And we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea, and provided for them of the good things, and preferred them over much of what we have created with preference.
Sir, we can say that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a pioneer in setting international humanitarian law at that time, and he put the foundation for these laws, as we can see that they were applied many years before by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So do you see that there are similarities between the international humanitarian law and what was taking place at that time?
That's a very important and safe conclusion, as a matter of fact, to make that, as a matter of fact, Islam stands as a pioneer in this regard. And this, as a matter of fact, happens to be the case with the teachings and the faith traditions of all prophets and the messengers. This dire need in order not to transgress against those who do not or who are no longer taking part in the fighting process itself is there in all of these faith traditions, as well as the importance of drawing a distinction between a military target and a civilian target, and that a civilian target has to be saved and spared at all costs. And how is it? For instance, it's a common theme among all faith traditions that it is not allowed, for instance, to target places of worship, be they churches or synagogues or any temples or similar places of worship, is also always there in all the major faith traditions. Another important dimension is the dimension of the environment. How is it taking care and observing the rights of the environment in order to make sure that there will be no form of pollution in the environment where the conflict took place, or where the conflict was witnessed, is very important on all of these faith traditions as well. And I do think that in the contemporary terms of our time and the understanding that we nowadays have, they actually constitute very powerful and relevant teachings when it comes to the protection of the environment and making sure that the conflict will not have any or bear any harmful ramifications or repercussions or effects as a result of this conflict or this combative operation between any parties involved.
Finally, I'd like to thank you, our dear guest, Dr. Hossam Ed-Deen Allam, Lecturer of International Humanitarian Law. Thank you, sir, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's always a pleasure.
And by that, dear viewers, we come to the end of today's edition of our program, Peace Be Upon You. Thank you for watching.